Welcome, everyone. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the tester's toolbox. I think probably most of you have found that over time, you have certain requirements for utilities, and those requirements often repeat. You might need something today, and then, 3 or 4 months from now, you might find in another project that you need the same thing. And so over time, because we've been doing automated testing for so long, we've assembled a toolbox here in support of tools that we just seem to use all the time. And so what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about, how to identify opportunities for creating reusable tools. I'm going to show you how to use the add function feature in AscentialTest to add a tool. I'm going to talk about how to share utilities within an organization, because you may have different teams using AscentialTest, or even just the same team but different projects, and you might want to share those tools between different projects. And then how would you share tools outside of your organization? For example, I have two files that I'm going to be talking about this morning, utilities.z and ini utilities.z. And as part of this presentation, we're just offering that toolbox to whoever wants it. So if after this presentation you decide you'd like one or both of those files, you can just send an email to support and we'll send you the file. And I'm going to talk about how you could then take that file and integrate it into your project. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to survey some of our favorite utilities, the ones that we tend to use a lot. I'm going to show you a few of them, and I'm going to run most of them for you so that you can see how they work. So when do you want to create a reusable tool? Well, tasks that need to be automated that are not specific to the target application. So these kind of tools that I'm talking about are not things that are tied to the application that I'm testing, but more like tools that I could use for many projects. So that's what I'm talking about, this toolbox. Some examples would be data operations, and I'm going to give you a lot of, 3 examples of some data operations. Test data operations. This comes up a lot in support. Users want to know, how can I increment some component or entity in my application, because I can't use the same one over and over. So there are different strategies for making test data unique. So I'm going to show a lot of different ways to do that. There's file operations that are necessary. String operations. Even though our string library in AscentialTest is pretty rich, there are some things that you might need beyond what we provide. And so we've written some of those in Z, and they're in our toolbox. Same thing goes for list operations. We have good list operations, a good list library in AscentialTest, but occasionally I've needed a few more things. So I know I've added some functions to that library. And then any file operations. We have a giant set of any file operations because we use them so much in testing. So I'm going to talk about those as well. Our tools are really functions in Z. So they're functions that we create in Z. But because we have this add function feature, you don't really have to be a Z programmer in order to create a tool, because as you'll see as I show it to you, we provide a template for creating a function, and all the drag and drop that you could use when you're creating a step works in the function editor as well. So if you've created steps in Z, and all of you have, in AscentialTest, I should say, then you can create a function as well. So if you haven't done it before, I'm going to show you how. So let me bring up, I have a number of copies of AscentialTest running because I want to show you different things. But I want to draw your attention right now over to the right-hand side of my screen. And you see this in the Actions Explorer, which I'm sure you're all familiar with Actions Explorer. And the Functions area. Now, the Functions area, as we ship the product, has logging and verification and other. Those are the only two subfolders in the functions. But you notice that mine has a lot of them. And that's because I have added a bunch of utilities to my project. And I'm going to take you through these utilities as we go through this presentation this morning. So there's quite a few of them, as you can see. And I've got them grouped so that it makes it easier to find them. Date utilities, INI utilities, list utilities, and so on and so forth. You can't really tell which ones are user-defined, can you? Because logging and verification and other are just kind of here. They're just alphabetic. So to create a new function, I would right-click here, and you see this context menu has the only one item, add function. And if I select it, I get the function editor. And the function editor, you know, we're looking at our slide, has a name, a group, a return type, parameters, and then the actions area. And as I mentioned, you can use the drag and drop in the actions area. So let's take a look at all of those different parts of the add function editor. Here's the name. So this would be the name of my function. You know, remember, you can't put spaces in, just like with a step, so no spaces. The name of my function would go here. And the description. And the description is really important, I think. Maybe even more so than in a step. Because if you just look at the names, I mean, some of them are obvious, but some of them aren't. So if I hover my mouse over, it says add months to the current month. And, you know, if I show you, the description is right here. So the description that you type here will display when we hover the mouse over the name of the function. The group is how we group the functions. And just like with steps, the first time you create a new group, you have to type it in. But then after that, you can see that the groups are here and you can just select a group. So if I said my new group and said save, then my new group is going to show up right here with the name of my function in it. The file, you get to choose whatever file you want to put this new utility in. I've been storing mine in INI file utilities and utilities.c. Two different libraries that we've created. The parameters section is maybe a little different than what you're used to with steps, because you know with steps we have in, out, and shared, but in a function we have in, out, and in, out. So you choose the mode, you give it a name, and then you select the type. Is this, are you going to allow null? Is it optional? And if so, what's the default? We'll look at a few examples that are filled in a minute. And then this is the actions area. This is the area where you can, you know, go into Z and you can start typing, or you can come over to your Actions Explorer, and you can use any of our, the database stuff, the string library, the list library. You can drag and drop just like you can from within a step. So not necessarily going to have to type in Z if what you're going to be doing is using some functions that are in existing libraries or classes. And that's primarily what you are going to be doing. You're going to be using things from the list library and the string library and so forth. So that's the editor that's used in order to create a new function. Now, before I go into surveying the functions, I want to talk a little bit about how you can share tools within the organization and outside the organization. Now, we have a really good help page on this. And I'm going to show it to you side by side here. So in the product help, under using built-in source control, which is its own book, we have working with shared libraries. Now, this feature is only available for enterprise customers. So you have to be using version control in order to share a library inside of AscentialTest. Outside, I'll show you the other way where you do it outside, then everyone, standard and enterprise, can use. So there's a way to share either way. But if you are an enterprise customer, you can use the shared libraries. The way that this works is that you use your Subversion, your visual SVN server, and you add a new repository for the shared library. And I have one called Utilities. So you come into your Subversion, and all you do is you just add the repository. And because I usually use a trunk, I select using a trunk, but that's all I do. You don't put the files in here. You just create the repository. So basically just giving it a name. Then you come over to AscentialTest. And let's just say, for example, that we have 2 projects, but this would apply to as many projects as you like. With the first project, you come in and you say, I want to create a new shared library. So you go up to your Project Explorer, and you can click on the Add button here, say New, Shared Library. This dialog box pops up, and you give it the name of your repository in Subversion, and if you're using a trunk, then /trunk. This will default because AscentialTest knows your connection to your Subversion. And when you do that, you'll see inside of AscentialTest, instead of what you normally see, which is just your project library, we know that one because it's the only item in the project library that has a colored icon. It's got a set of books here. You'll see the shared library, and you'll, by default, get the green lock. Then what you need to do is you need to add the files to the shared library. So this is basically your import. You're importing this into Subversion. So you pick your files, and then your files end up in the library. And as you noticed, mine had 2. My ini file utilities and my utilities.c, which are the 2 files that we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes. Now, for subsequent projects, at this point, it's been imported into Subversion. For subsequent projects now, you're just going to go again up to add, but this time you're going to say existing. So you're going to add an existing library. You put in the project path, and this is more like a checkout, like if you're comparing it to checking in and checking out, or importing and checking out a project. And then you will see the new library in the second or third or whatever project that you have. So it's not hard to do. It's quite easy. I had to teach myself again, to be honest, because I hadn't done it in a while in order to prepare for the presentation. But that's how it's done. Now, if you're not using version control inside of AscentialTest, or you just want to share a library with maybe another customer, or the way we're going to share our libraries with you, all you do is you just zip up the functions into a Z file and you can mail them. So if I was to come, into my project, I go to my project, I can go to Open Project folder, can navigate into my library, my project library. I've got utilities, INI utilities. I've got utilities. I can just put them in a zip, like I did here, called utility.zip. I can send it to you. Then when I do, this is what I want to show you now, the process of basically unpacking it and getting into your project. So if you do request one or both of those files from us, and we send you the zip, you're going to unzip it and you're going to put it right here in Project, Open Project folder, Libraries, Project Library. So you'll unzip the contents of the zip file right here into this folder. But you're not done yet. So once you do that, then you need to come over here, very similar to what I just showed you with Subversion. And you're going to say Add, Existing, Z file. You'll navigate to the file, select it. You have to do them one by one. We don't have multi-select here. And then click Open, and then it will become part of your project. So that's how you get it into your project. Once you do that, it'll automatically show up here in functions. It'll be in the groups that we've provided, because that's actually part of the function itself, the group right here. If we provided a group, and we did, all of our functions have groups associated with them. So that's how you will get something from another project in your organization or from someone outside of your organization into your project. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the functions that we have. And if you look over here, you notice they're all grouped. So date, INI, list, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to start by talking about our date functions. So we've got 3 date utilities in the library. One's called add month, one's called add year, and one's called get last date of month. And I want to talk about a couple of them. First thing I want to do is I want to show you what one looks like. So this one is called get last date of month. And what it does is it returns the last date of the month that you provided. Sounds kind of trivial, but it's, it is something that sometimes people need. In applications, you might be prompted for the last date of a month. And that's easy for all months but February, right? Because of leap year. So we created something where you pass in the month and the year. Optionally, if you don't, it will just use the current month and year. And basically what this does is it creates a new date. It's going to return a date. You see the return type up here. It's going to return a date of the last date of the month and year that you passed in. It's actually quite easy to do though, because if you call make, which is a built-in function, you call date.make and you give it an invalid year, month, day, it'll fail. So once I realized that, I wrote this, you could do a try catch. So you can do a try and you could make, and I'm always going to try to make using the 31, the longest date in any month. And if it works, I can break out. Then I know that that particular month had a 31. If not, I'm just going to subtract a day. And I'm going to keep doing that until I get to a valid date. And I know then that that's the last date of the month. Okay. So with November, we're going to get down to 30, right? But with February, it's going to be either 29 or 28, depending on whether it's a leap year. 29 next year. So that gives you an idea of what a function might look like. And you'll notice again, I'm referencing functions that are already in the AscentialTest class library. You see I use date.now to get the current if the month wasn't passed in. I'm using getYear, getMonth. I'm using make. So I didn't write much of this. Most of this was just drag and drop. So that gives you an idea of a function. Here's another one, getFieldReverse. I'm guessing that most of you have used getField, and getField is in our string library. In fact, I probably use getField maybe more than anything else in the string library. It's a parser, and it'll basically parse out a string from a string. You can use a delimiter, and it'll get a field out of a string. But we didn't put one in the library that goes backward. And sometimes using just regular getField, it can be a little hard to get from the end of the string. So we created this one. It actually doesn't use getField. It uses a different approach. Basically takes you pass in a string and a delimiter and a field, very similar to the way getField works. And we call split. Again, we didn't write split. Split was part of AscentialTest string library. So here's the string. We split it using the delimiter. So now we have a list of string. Well, we know how many strings there are in the list of string because we call count. Again, we're calling something from the library. Now that's in the list library, list count. But we're going from the back. So, if there's nothing, if it ends up, when we do the subtraction of the field, if it ends up being less than or equal to 0, we don't return anything. But if not, then we just take the count, add 1 and subtract the field, and there we go. We've got, from the back end, we've got the field that we want. I'm going to test this for you in a few minutes, so you'll get another look at it. Actually, I'm going to test most of them for you. I'm going to run a tester so that you can see how they all work. It's another one I wanted to show you. The one that I use more than any other one, actually. It is called, it's in this, bear with me a minute. Actually, which one is it? It's this one. Very simple little function, but I think I use this more than anything else in my toolbox because I always seem to need to randomize, not randomize really, but to make things unique because I can't use, a customer name more than once or company name or something like that. So a nice way to do that, a very simple way to do that, is to output a date timestamp that can then be concatenated on to something else. And you can see how easy this is because, again, I just used what was already available to me in our class library. So we have something called now, which will return the current date, in this case, date time. So I return that, and then I take and format it. And I'm passing the format in. The format is, how do you want this string to look? Do you want slashes? Do you want dashes? What order do you want the year, month, day in? That sort of thing. So you pass the format in, and you can get that format out of our help. And then I just return it. So it returns a string that is the formatted date time now. And then you can just add that on to anything that you need to in order to make it unique. So those are a couple of examples of, I wanted you to see what they actually look like. Now what I want to do is I'm going to survey them and we're going to test them. So let's start with the date utilities. I'm just going to go right down the line here. So I have a tester for each one. So if I want to call add month, I can give it a date if I want to add month to a date, or what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add 26 months to right now. And if I run it, I get the date, December 19th. I'm sorry, not December 19th, because it's 26, February 19th of 2026. So I added 26 months to 12/19/2023. The next one is add year. It's kind of similar. I gave you two examples here. Here I'm just adding year to the current, and here I'm adding a year to a date, last May. If I run it, see 2026 from last May, or you see 2026 from today. Yeah, last date of month. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Let's run the tester for that. And again, I gave you a couple of examples there. So here's the last date of the current month. Here's the last date of March. Let's see it. Let's make sure it works. Look here. Yep. Notice next year is leap year. So those are 3 date functions that I think are pretty useful. I utilities, these are the only ones I'm actually not going to run for you because there's just so many of them. But I do want to explain how they're used. We use INI files, and you can look this up actually from our YouTube channel. There was a seminar like this where we talked a lot about using INI files for test data, dynamic test data. The idea is that sometimes you don't prescribe what data is going to be used during the running of a test. Instead, you're going to grab data maybe randomly from your application's database, but you need to know what that data is once you grab it, because you're probably going to need to do some verification on it later. So the idea is that we capture the data that we're going to use and we write it to an INI file. And then we go through the application and process, based on whatever the application does. And then we write the results again to an INI file. And then we verify what we expect to be in the INI file based on the initial starting test data. So that's what all of these are for. You can see there's functions that will clear a section, one that'll compare two INI files, the whole file, deleting a section, getting a section, getting a value, setting a value to an INI, checking to see whether a section's already there, verifying two INI sections, verifying two INI values, and so on and so forth. So everything that you would need in order to manipulate and compare values or sections of INI files. So that's what's in that library. Now I'll go back to demonstrating. So in the list library, we've got something called compare two lists. So here's the test two lists. So I've got a couple of lists. These are simple, just for our purposes in here. I've got a list, an actual list, ABC, and an expected list, ABC. And I've got two lists set up to capture anything that was missing from the actual list or extra. And then I call the two list compare, which you see right here. Okay, this one is kind of an involved function, but let's run it. So in this case, the result of the comparison was true, meaning the two lists match. There isn't anything missing and there isn't anything extra. But if I come in here and I change this and I run it, well, now it says that the comparison was false, and I ended up with, I'm missing D, but I have an extra C. So that's how that function works. It's pretty useful if you've got two lists that you want to compare. Search and replace in a list. So let's take a look at that one. So I've got a list, and again, I've made my examples simple so that they'd be easy for us to get right away when I run them. But this would work on something very complex. So I've got my list. It's just got red, green, and blue in it. And then I want to search for green and replace it with yellow. So I run it, and you can see that it did just that. So instead of red, green, blue, I've got red, uppercase yellow, blue. Search for lines in a list. So here, I want to see which line has a particular string. So I can run it, and it will tell me it found it in this line right here. Remember logging and verification, those are built in. My group, we were just playing around. Other is built in, but the string library is part of my utilities. These next two are related to ASCII. There are times when you need to get the ASCII value of a character in a string, or maybe you need to get them all. So let's take a look at those. I've got them both here in the same function. I'm going to run this for you. And you can see that if I want to get the ASCII value of the third character in this string, that letter right there, there it is. If I want to get the ASCII value for all of the values, then I call get ASCII of string, and it will give you a list of all the ASCII values. Maybe you've never needed to get the ASCII value of a string, but I certainly have. Get field reverse. This is the one I showed you. Now let's see how it works. So I have my source string right here. This is a delimited string. Notice it's delimited by a comma. Now here's the get field that's just part of the AscentialTest library, right? It's down here in the string library, get field. I think I mentioned that. I use that more than anything in the library. But we didn't have get field reverse, so we created one. So let's run it and see what happens. So the regular get field, I'm getting the first field. True means I want to remove any white space on either side of it. I'm going to trim it. So we get this. And notice that this is actually a method off of the string itself. So you say string dot get field, the delimiter, the field, meaning this is the first one, this is the second one, this is the third one, fourth one, fifth one, and whether or not you want to trim it. Here, it's a function, so you give it the string. Here's the delimiter, and there's the field. Let me see if I remember to put, do we trim? No, that's probably an enhancement we should do. Should put a option to trim on that one, just like the one that we have built into the product. Parse bounded string. This one's interesting as well. So let's say that I have a string and I want to get a string in between two other strings. So I could use get field to do this by calling it multiple times, but if you want to do it, more easily, this parse bounded string will do that for you. So the first, actually, let's look at it so you can see the parameters. So you provide the string that you want to parse. Here's the left boundary and the occurrence, because there could be more than one occurrence of the left boundary. The left boundary meaning the string that you're going to use to locate the starting point of your search. And then the right is the ending point. So you want to get what's between S left and S right, but you're specifying which occurrence, and I'll show you the difference here. So here's the string. This is a sample string. This is another sample string. We're going to look for the value between is and sample, is and sample, is and sample. If I say the second occurrence, I should get another. So if I run it, sure enough, I get another. If I say one, then I'm going to get because is in between the left and the right first occurrence of is. So that's how that works. Returning a random alphanumeric string. Somebody just needed something like this the other day. So here you pass in, let's take a look at it. So in this case, it's kind of formatted. There's going to be alpha in the beginning, alpha in the end, and then some numerals in the middle. And you can specify how many alphas you want in the beginning, how many in the end, and how many numerals. This particular customer that needed this had a very specific pattern they needed, but I wrote this for them and I just decided I would make it more flexible. That's how I did it. So if we run it, you see it gives you 3 random alpha characters followed by 5 numerals and then 2 alpha characters. If I run it again, it's going to be different. Every time I run it, it's going to be different. So that's how that works. Returning a random string. I think a lot of people need this, actually. Show this one. There might be other ways to do this. But the way I did it was I came up with a string with all the letters. And then you give me the length that you want and whether or not you want to convert them to upper. So that's what this does. It's simple. There's nothing to it, really. I'm using random and 2 upper. So I'm using, again, existing calls to do it. And if I run it, in this case, it'll just give me a if I run it with false, we'll get lowercase. Test data. This gets asked for a lot. So the idea here is that you have some entity, and let me show you. I go to my project. I've got the incrementer file here. Maybe you've got a customer, a company, you've got something in your application, and you can't use it more than once. So you've got a test transaction where you're adding a new customer to your application. Well, you can only add John Smith once. And then you have to say John Smith 1, John Smith 2, John Smith 3, and so forth. So, you know, the idea here is that you use an INI file and you keep track of the last incrementer that you used, so that every time you call it, it just bumps it up. So if we test this, and the incrementer takes the file that you're using, the section of the INI file. Let's look at it again, make sure I'm telling you right. Yeah. Let's just look at it alongside of. So here's the section. Here's the L value, cusnum, and then here's the thing that gets incremented right there. So every time I run this, it's going to go up. And if I open the file again, you can see it got incremented. So that's also, I think, quite a useful function. Now I'm going to demonstrate some of these. Some of these are from other projects that are in my toolbox that other people might use. The close active windows is something that gets used if you're going to be configuring your on finish in order to close any windows that are open. This is, quite a function that has to get tweaked, and I've helped a number of customers tweak this when they put it into their project. So we're not going to run that one because it's a little bit too involved, and I've done that in other seminars, so you can look that up. Compare two text files. So look at this. Compare two text files. I've got a couple of examples here, one where it's going to pass and one where it's going to fail. You basically give it two text files. So I have project attributes XML, project attributes XML. Here I'm purposely comparing project data XML and project attributes XML, which are not going to compare, just so you can see. When the first one ran, it just says that the verify match passed, and the other one says the verify match failed. This function does not go and show you what's different about the two files. That certainly could be done, but that wasn't what was needed here. It was basically just saying, does this file match the baseline, yes or no? So that's what it does. You could easily call the other one that I used earlier where we compared two lists. You could break those text files down into lists of strings and then call that, and it would tell you exactly what was the same and what was different, what was extra, what was missing, that kind of thing. Return date timestamp as a string. I showed you that already. Well, actually, I showed it to you. I don't know if I ran it. Did I? I don't think I did. So there you go. So there's the date timestamp as a string. And this was the format I was talking about. You can add minutes and seconds to that if you want, because it's date time, it's not just date. So if you needed this to be even more random, and just so you know, if you want to know what the format is, we could go to, let's see, if we go to C language reference and we look up the date class here, we go to format, you'll see here's how you pattern that format. That's what all the letters were that were like here. YYY is the year, month, day. So if I wanted to add, minutes, hours, minutes, and seconds, I can do that. So I could say like HH, M, so capital H, what is it? Capital HH, lowercase mm. Let's see what happens. So now it starts adding hours and minutes and things like that. So that's how we use that. And a couple more. Search for lines in a file. So here, if you want to find what line a particular string resides in, you could run it, and it gives you the line. And finally, verify string with masking. This one kind of gets asked for a lot as well. So the idea is that you want to verify something. You want to verify some string in your application, but only part of the string is predictable. Part of it is system generated. It could be like this. Maybe it's the day of the week, or it could be the time. Could be anything that's generated by the system that you can't predict. So instead of trying to do verify value, you say verify with masking. And so if I run this, you can see that they do match because I've masked out with an asterisk the part that I don't want to compare. So it's going to compare today is This is the string that this is my expected. Let's look at it. So the expected and the actual. So here's my expected. I mask out what I don't want to verify. And so it'll verify the rest, but it won't verify what I've masked out. So also a very useful function, I think. Okay, so those are the functions that I wanted to show you. Those are sort of my favorite functions. We've gone through them all. We've talked about how we create reusable tools or are identifying opportunities for creating them. We learned about the add function feature. Talked about how to share utilities using Subversion, where we have a shared library, or how we share them outside. Just zip them, unzip them, and add them. And then we've surveyed some of the utilities.